Hello everyone and welcome to Fiction Friday. Today we have episode 8 of The Lightning. I hope you enjoy it. In the end, Karash's nose led him to the rest of his team. Nothing smelled quite like the mix of sweat and rage a berserker gave off during a fight. A sort of musky, spicy funk that any warrior knew at once. His squad gathered in the alley across from the outer castle wall. The castle guards stared out toward the flashes and explosions, just as he'd hoped. When do we attack? Sakar vibrated in place with barely suppressed energy. Right now. As soon as the sorcerers made contact with the others, our time started counting down. Don't bother with the guards unless they get in your way. Push straight toward the keep. As long as we kill the king, nothing else matters. He got immediate nods from Catan and Kolto. Sakar tried to stare him down, but it would take more than a pup to buck Karash. At last, Sakar growled and gave his nod. Go. Karash and the others rushed the wall at full speed. They leapt. As he passed, Sakar tore the throat out of one of the guards. A cry went up and soldiers came running out into the dark courtyard. Worthless idiot. If they'd just left the guards alone, the humans would have seen nothing but a passing blur. They may have even thought they imagined it. Now the whole cursed castle would be up and ready. If they lived through this, he was going to kill Sakar himself. A phalanx of warriors quickly formed up in front of the doors to the keep. Spears bristled and shields locked together as more and more humans poured out of the nearby barracks. Many wore nothing but tunics. They had courage. Karash had to grant them that at least. Not that it would save them. Sakar and Kolto crashed into the gathered warriors a step ahead of Karash and Catan. Humans went flying in every direction. A sword skipped off Karash's arm without biting. In the blink of an eye, he tore the arm swinging it out of the human's shoulder. Blood spurted and the man fell screaming to the ground. The rustle of rushing footsteps mingled with the faint jingle of mail provided just enough warning for Karash to draw a stolen sword and spin to meet the chop of a human. The force behind the blow drove him back a step. Enemies behind, Karash shouted. 9 more warriors accompanied the man that attacked him. Karash grinned. At last, some enemies worth killing. The human warlords were fast, almost as fast as Karash himself. 4 of them attacked at once. Even fighting in a fully defensive posture, the humans forced him to call on the Queen's gift to turn aside a portion of their strikes. 1 blow bounced off his side. The human gaped in surprise at his failed attack. Karash sliced the man's head off. Beside him, the others finished off the humans blocking their way and turned back to engage the warlords. 4 against 9 wasn't exactly fair, but Karash had no intention of giving the warlords a break. He didn't want to be out in the yard when the sorcerers returned. Tan's axe cut deep into the side of one of his opponents. That bought Karash just enough room to switch from defense to offense. His sword darted in, punching through a warlord's armor and slicing his heart in half. He ripped the blade free, spun, and hacked the head off a second warlord. Over the course of many battles he'd learned, against both humans and his own kind, that if you didn't instantly kill a berserker, they'd heal, and Karash preferred to fight his opponents only once. Silence surrounded him, along with the bodies of his enemies. None of his team showed so much as a scratch. So far, so good. Let's go. Karash smashed through the closed doors and strode into the keep. He had a king to kill, and time grew short. The castle throne room was silent and nearly empty, save for Dornkirk, the king, and 6 members of the royal guard who stood as silent as statues near the rear wall. Dornkirk rolled his massive shoulders, trying to work a crick out. It was a minor annoyance, but no matter how much soul force he sent to the air, it never stayed healed for more than a day or 2. He must be getting old. The king's champion looked down at his charge. King Adam sat on his throne, chin on his fist, lost in thought. Despite his best efforts, he hadn't been able to convince the king to remain in bed. The archmage insisted he needed rest, but the king's worry for his son prevented him from calming enough to sleep. Dornkirk swallowed a sigh. Prince Andrew had gone on his tour of the kingdom, and not 3 days later they received word of ogres crossing the mountains. Not the most auspicious start to his journey. Dornkirk doubted the prince would be thrilled at the recall order, but until matters with the ogres was settled, it was better to be safe than sorry, especially given the king's frail condition. King Adam must have felt his gaze. He looked up, and Dornkirk tried his best to put on a reassuring expression. Of his many looks, reassuring came the least readily. The prince will be fine. Frederick will protect him. He'll be home safe and sound before morning. Adam wheezed a laugh. The lung infection that had vexed him for the past 2 months had already begun to show itself after the most recent healing. If Dornkirk had believed in curses, he might have feared the king had fallen prey to one. "Am I so transparent?" the king asked. "Only with regards to your son, Majesty." "Heaven's mercy, Dornkirk. Can you not even call me by my name when court is empty? You've been my champion for over a decade. If anyone's earned the right, it's you." "I don't want to get in the habit lest I slip at an inopportune moment." He didn't add that no matter how long he served the king, he'd never be comfortable calling him by his name. "How fares young Frederick?" "He's..." A tremendous crash, followed by the screech of steel on steel, saved him from having to answer. He was proud of all his son had accomplished, but he didn't feel comfortable discussing it. "I should check that out," Dornkirk said. "One of those idiots probably knocked over a suit of armor. The night guards are nowhere near as competent as the day crew." Dornkirk drew the demon sword and sent soul force surging through his body. That wasn't the crash of an empty suit of armor hitting the floor. That was the sound of combat. He'd covered half the distance to the door when it exploded inward. 4 figures rushed through the opening. Even with his enhanced vision, he barely made out more than an indistinct blur. He drew deeper from his core, and Lizenoir sent extra power coursing through him. Dornkirk returned to the king's side in less than the blink of an eye. Even so, he barely blocked the descending blade before it struck the king. When their swords locked, he got his first good look at the intruder. It, for the creature was no man, stood over 8 feet in height, and muscles bulged all over its body under blue skin. It wielded a sword as long as Dornkirk was tall, and wore a white mask that looked like the face of a dragon. Ogre berserkers. Now they knew where the last of the groups that crossed the mountain ended up. The other 3 intruders were making fast work of the 6 royal guards, powerful warlords all. If these ogres could deal with them so easily, he was in serious trouble. Dornkirk registered all this, processed it, and made a decision in less than a heartbeat. The throne room was too open for a fight against 4 opponents as powerful as these. If he didn't have to defend the king, he might have made a different decision. But for now, he had no choice but to run. A surge of soul force powered Dornkirk's swing, sending his opponent flying. He slung the king over his shoulder and ran at near warlord speed out the ruined door. The entire clash had taken no more than 2 seconds, and the king didn't speak so much as a word. King Adam had the good sense not to say anything now either. The last thing Dornkirk needed was a distraction, not with the thunder of pursuing enemies filling his ears. The invaders gained with every step. Dornkirk didn't dare run at his maximum speed for fear of injuring the king. Unlike his son, King Adam wasn't a warlord. Dornkirk rounded a corner, and then another. Servants appeared and disappeared in the blink of an eye. He considered hiding in the city, trying to pick them off one at a time, but the assassins were too close for him to lose. He knew what he had to do, even if he didn't like it. The Archmage had retreated to his basement workshop to try and figure out some way to help the king. Sam Hale had looked like hell after his last attempt to rid the king of his infection. Dornkirk didn't like relying on sorcerers, but he'd run out of options. Assuming he'd recovered, Sam Hale was one of, if not the most powerful sorcerer in the kingdom at the moment. A second later, they crashed the door to the basement. Barely reached the bottom of the steps when Sam Hale appeared in the middle of the path. "What happened?" the Archmage asked. "I sensed powerful, inhuman soul force." "Berserkers. 4 of them. Part of the group you mentioned, I suspect." Dornkirk set the king on his feet. "They're hard on our heels." "Never fear, Dornkirk." The Archmage favored him with a faint, condescending smile. "I sent one of my Crimson Legion to investigate. Things should be sorted momentarily. Thank heaven for that, Samhael, the king said. We barely escaped those monsters the first time. The Archmage bowed. The Crimson Legion are ever at your majesty's disposal. Dornkirk couldn't decide if he wanted to puke or punch Samhael in a smug face. Whatever he might think of the Archmage, at least the king was safe. Samhael cocked his head. Let's make our way to the escape tunnel, Majesty. Something very wrong is happening upstairs. Merrick! A short, slender man in red emerged from a door further down the hall. Master? Enemies are coming. Deal with them. Merrick bowed. Without fail, Master. The Archmage led the way toward the secret tunnel, his face scrunched up in a grimace. Samhael's concern twisted Dornkirk's stomach. Much as he disdained the sorcerer's arrogance, seeing his confidence rattled, at least in this situation, brought Dornkirk no pleasure. Thanks for listening to Episode 8 of The Lightning. I hope you'll join me next week for Episode 9. You can check out the complete Soul Force saga on my website, jamesewisher.com. Link in the description. Until next time, goodbye.